Buon dia, mi amigos e amica circum limunde. Dies Bob Petry e Arlene Petry, mi esposa, o marita.
Yes.
E dies li programa internacional memorandum. It es un programa in prim pri li lingue internacional occidental interlingue. Ma honacht nui va usar li lingue angles. Nui va discusser li libre de Jeremiah and li Bible. And we will also have an insert.
Yes.
Probably more insert than Jeremiah.
Probably.
But this evening what we're going to do also, since sometimes we need to get other things in besides just the language, we want to talk a little bit again about the scriptures and the study that we're now doing on Code 6.4 about the book of Jeremiah. And so shall we go ahead and talk about some of those things tonight too, Arlene?
Yes, of course.
I thought I would start with something that was one of those little piquant points of things in the scriptures that most people overlook, and that is, are we living in the end of the age, or the end of days, or the last days, or the end of time, or whatever? Prophetically, we are in the last days. Now, the interesting thing about that is this. When you talk about the end of days, or the last days, most people that study the books in the Bible for understanding prophecy say, well, the last days began in the time of the Messiah. And so we don't know what to make of these things because, well, take the book of Revelation for instance. Some people think it was already done, completed and everything, long ago, back around the time of the temple and a little bit afterwards, or the time of the temple destruction in 70 AD. But the scriptures are very clear, and this is what confuses most readers, is they read only in the English. They never check to see what the underlying text says. And one of those texts that should be checked is 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11. Because in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, it tells us something very important about the end times. And that is this. Now, all these happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition. And Paul was talking about our at the time in his day, because he was writing to people at that time, and he was talking in his writing to those people that were alive at the same time he was, and he said, these are written for our admonition, upon whom, it says, the ends of the world are come. Now notice something here very interesting. Upon whom the ends, plural, of the world, singular, are come. Now, I don't mind telling you that is an incorrect translation. Let me read it out of the Ivan Panin translation, which is a little more accurate in many places than the King James Version. And here it happens to be very accurate, much more so than the King James Version. So verse 11 of 1 Corinthians 10 says, now these happened to them as a figure, and were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages are come. Both words, ends and ages, being in the plural. Now what this means is every single prophecy has its own timeline. And every single prophecy that is to be in the end times, some of them overlap and some don't. Each one of them has a different time of beginning and ending, and some of them run parallel for a while, and some of them don't. Some run prior and afterwards. But what it's saying is, and each prophecy is clear within itself when it's supposed to be, that we live from Paul's time on for our admonition. We live in the ends of the ages, or the ends of these times. And so some of these prophecies that are for the end of time, or the latter days, means a certain portion of the latter days from the time of the Messiah till now. Some of them don't apply to us today because some of them truly are. Some of the smaller minor prophecies are already done away. But if you read closely is the point. If you read the scriptures closely, you can get clues to help straighten out what is not understood. But you have to be willing to go beyond just the King James Version, or any other version for that matter. Frankly, one needs to be able to go back to the Greek, whether they can read it or not, and to the Hebrew, because there are so many aids today available that anyone with a little time and thinking can figure out some of these things by going back and using an interlinear and a dictionary and a lexicon, etc., and find out, sure enough, those languages of preservation do not always say what the King James Version says. And it's important. Anyway, that's enough of that just as a short little blurb, and I mean, you could do 2 or 3 programs about that by giving lots of examples and making it clearer. But tonight what we want to do is show an insert that I might decide to cut it short, but if we let it run the full time, would run about 30-35 minutes, and I'm not sure I want to let it run that long, but we'll see. But the interesting thing about it to me is you can see us age right there on the screen. What are you laughing at, Arlene?
Oh, well, it happens anyway, no matter.
The insert, when it starts, it will begin with an interview I did with a local rabbi, and the question I'm asking him was about the temple. I also asked some other questions. I wish now I'd go back and find that tape and do some inserts off of the other questions. But this one was specifically about the temple, and you'll see one of the excuses or reasons given for not being, at least among some of the Israelis, etc., not being so anxious to rebuild the temple. And it has nothing to do whatsoever with what the scriptures say. But the scriptures do say there is coming a temple, and it is going to show up in our day, guaranteed, and there's going to be some surprising things about that. Anyway, there's some other things in this insert. One of the inserts will show one of the programs where I was explaining the correct translation of the terms in the Bible: forever, forever and ever, eternal, etc. And it just gives you a blurb of how you can prove for yourself that those terms do not exist in the original text in the way that we're taught. They mean a certain period of time that has a beginning and an ending. And then there's another section toward the end that talks about Jeremiah and Zechariah and shows something very interesting that pulls them together. So, anyway, if the insert is ready, Mr. Director, you may commence immediately.
All around Jerusalem would take their turn, like reserve duty for 2 weeks, going into Jerusalem to maintain the temple and the sacrificial cult. People who lived in these communities during that period would gather in prayer in houses of gathering, and they devised readings in keeping with the spirit of the animal sacrifices. Those places were called in Greek synagogues, and that's the origin of the word synagogue. They were led by laymen. These were not ordained priests. They didn't inherit anything. And these people separated themselves, as they were called, from the priestly system. And the word for separatist in Hebrew, perushim, which in Greek comes out Pharisee. The leaders of these groups, who became leaders, did so because they supposedly knew more. They were better students. And more, or great of something, was Rav. And hence my Rav, my teacher, Rabbi, my teacher. And that's the origin of the word rabbi. So the rabbis are laymen. We're not, I didn't inherit anything from my father, rabbinic.
Is it true that there can only be a priesthood when there's a temple standing?
Sure, surely. And all this business about priests now is silly, because there isn't a Jew alive who can trace his bloodline back to that far. Absolutely right.
There's, on a side topic, when there's a temple and a priesthood, one can collect tithes, right?
Well, I guess. Only Christians seem to be interested in this. I haven't met too many Jews, if any, who are really anxious or even talking about rebuilding the temple.
Right.
I mean, the thought of putting up a building and killing animals in the backyard would bring the Humane Society and
yeah.
you know,
Everybody else.
right. We would, you know, you look at all the fuss over furs, you know, and with people beating the seals up.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to show that was this is the general belief, I believe, of most folks that are of the Jewish faith and or consider themselves Jews by accepting the Jewish religion and or by birth. I believe this is what they are taught, and when it comes to the temple. But did you see his argument there, or reasoning, which was very interesting? I hadn't heard that before, that we couldn't have a temple because there would be too many people up in arms about animal rights.
Yeah.
Which would never have occurred back in the old days.
Never.
But there is not enough argument against that to even consider not building a temple. But this next tape, I hope it's ready, this goes into a discussion my wife and I had in middle or late October or early November of 1989 about the temple. So let's run the third tape. Probably the first program that we came on with, maybe it was the second one because the first in this series, but the second program we ever did called Code 6.4, I said that in this program we would actually be living and fulfilling prophecy. Part of the prophecy we were fulfilling that I was thinking about was Daniel, where it says more and more knowledge would be opened up, and the book of Daniel in particular would be opened up to understanding in the end times. But I didn't really realize how accurate that statement was going to be, and I would like to make another statement that in the next weeks and months you're going to see more and more biblical prophecy come to pass, and those of you that are skeptics, you're going to just say, well, those are natural events. But they're strange natural events in that they were prophesied several thousand years ago to occur, and when you see them occurring, they're not supernatural when you watch them from that sense. They look perfectly natural. So one of them that's happening right now that cannot or must occur in order for prophecy to be fulfilled, because in 2 Thessalonians, I think it's chapter 2 here, is a prophecy. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay, maybe it's 2 Thessalonians 2. That's the trouble. I should have... yeah, here we go. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Master Yahshua Messiah and our gathering together to him, that you may not be quickly disturbed from your composure, or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter, as if from us, to the effect that the day of Yahweh has come. Let no man in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called mighty one or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of Elohim, displaying himself as being Elohim. So it says in the end time there's going to be a man that will sit in the temple. And a lot of people think that that temple is just a spiritual temple, but in reality, if you put other prophecies together, it is speaking of the rebuilding of the actual physical temple in Jerusalem. So I'd like you to read that, Arlene. This is something that was out of the recent Time magazine, October 16th edition, and if you want to get a copy of it, you can go to the library and read this yourself. But what does it say?
Shall we show the picture?
Yeah, we'll do that after you read it.
Okay, all right. There's quite a bit to read. Time for a new temple. Traditionalist Jews hope to rebuild their sacred edifice, but a mosque and centuries of enmity stand in the way. Okay. Temple reconstruction was no issue until 1967.
Let me stop you right there and mention something. 1967 is a very interesting year because of the fact that it talks about the last generation that these things are to be done in. Now, biblically, I don't want to get into this right now, I just want to breeze over it and mention it to you. Biblically, a generation, depending on different sections, is either 30 years or 40 years in the Bible. So 30 years from 1967 would be 1997. And if you add 10 more years to that, you can figure out that you're going past the year 2000. But the interesting thing is, in latter part of 1997 to the beginning of 1998, somewhere in that time frame, is the end of the ideal chronology of the Bible. In other words, 6,000 years will have passed from the time of Adam. And supposedly in prophecy, man has been given 6,000 years to see if he can rule himself on this earth. And then there's supposed to be a new millennium or another 1,000 years where the Father will send the Messiah back to the earth to rule during 1,000 years to show the difference between man's idiotic rule for 6,000 and the Father's rule for 1,000 years. But anyway, 30 years of the last generation we might be that last generation is all I'm saying right now. Go ahead and read it.
Okay. Temple reconstruction was no issue until 1967, when Israel captured the Mount and the Old City. Eager to preserve peace, Israel continues to allow Muslims to administer the site. Okay. A 1983 newspaper poll showed that a surprising 18.3% of Israelis thought it was time to rebuild. A mere 3% wanted to wait for the Messiah. Next week's Israel Ministry of Religion Affairs will sponsor a first ever conference of temple research to discuss whether contemporary Jews are obligated to rebuild. However, several small organizations in Jerusalem believe the question is settled. They are zealously making preparations for a new temple in spite of the doctrinal obstacles and the certainty of provoking Muslim fury. 2 Talmudic schools located near the Western Wailing Wall are teaching nearly 200 students the elaborate details of temple service.
Now, wait a minute. This is modern day times we're talking about, and they're teaching students temple services in preparation for the building of a temple in our day.
Isn't that what it says?
And of course, you know, before this occurred, and it's in the process now, before it occurred, people would say that we're scoffers. The temple will never be rebuilt. The Jews will never plan for it. No way, Jose. Now that it's coming, what they'll say is, well, this is just some kind of natural occurrence, and of course the Jews are going to worship in the temple again because that's their heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, it's not going to please the scoffers. But I guarantee you and tell you right now, this is prophecy coming to pass in your day, friends. Your day. You're living this now. Go ahead.
Other groups are searching the family lines of Jewish priests who alone may conduct sacrifices. Next year, an organizing convention will be held for those who believe themselves to be of priestly descent. Former Chief Rabbi Shlomo Goren, who heads another Temple Mount organization, believes his research has fixed the location of the ancient Holy of Holies so that Jews can enter the Mount without sacrilege. He insists, I cannot leave this world without assuring that Jews will once again pray on the Mount. No group is more zealous than the Temple Institute, whose spiritual leader, 50-year-old Rabbi Israel Ariel, was one of the first Israeli paratroopers to reach the Mount in 1967. Quote, our task, states the Institute's American-born director, Zev Golan, is to advance the cause of the temple and to prepare for its establishment, not just talk about it.
Yeah, to do what? Prepare?
Yeah,
And
not just talk about
not
it.
just talk
They're
about
going to do it.
Yeah.
They're ready.
Well, you know, we talked about that, and that's 1989, and there is still more news coming out. I just happen to have 2 books. I picked up one in 1992 and 1994 about the temple. One is In Search of Temple Treasures. The other is Ready to Build. And they have a chart in the back of it of things that have happened since we gave that program. And it keeps moving on and on toward occurring, folks. And we're telling you it's going to occur. Now this next, by the way, she was reading from Time magazine, and we don't have time to let it go that far, although I wanted to. The page that was on in the October issue of Time magazine was page 64. Of course, that number doesn't mean a thing. Now, we have another tape, and I want to show it as soon as it gets ready. And this tape is something that I wanted to be as a special tonight, even more so, because it, within showing this previously of what we'd already talked about that had occurred, I'm continuing to talk on that tape about something that when we come out of it, I want to show you in the news today. That is the second one coming to pass, right in front of your eyes. So if the tape's ready, let's run that. That wasn't any big deal, was it? Don't worry about it, folks. Nothing's going wrong.
Yes.
The reason I wanted to show that was because that was just a couple of months ago. This is September. That was in June that we just mentioned in passing about the Gaza Strip. But, you know, clear up to that time, people were saying, no way, they're not going to do it. It wasn't in the news that they're meeting and coming to an agreement on it.
Exactly.
So I thought, well, let's go back a little bit further. So well, actually, this is a tape right after that June tape. And I thought I would get this in because it's a little humorous. I hope nobody gets mad at me, but the point is the scriptures speak louder than any of us. Now, this tape is going to run about 5 minutes, and it was done in July. In fact, it was cataloged here as being shown on July 7th, I believe it was, 1993. And as soon as that's ready, okay, we need to stretch a little time while it gets ready. But the thing is that gets me, you know, people are always saying, I'll see it when I believe it. Do you know anybody? And I've asked several questions of different people now that watch the media and other things and listen to programs and all this. Is there anybody else that said this and given a time frame? Because they're going to see in the last one we give the time frame.
You know, Bob, the fact of the matter is that when people say, I'll believe it when I see it, is that they don't believe it when they see it. Even when they see it, they don't believe it. So it's just an out.
They'll have to admit one thing tonight, whether they believe it or not or think it's a big deal, we have proof that we said it before it hit front page news, and we said it at least a minimum of 2 years ago.
Yes.
And when we said it, well, let me say that last when we get to that one, when we said it, because I told them to remember a certain month.
Are you ready?
Yes, we're ready. So here's the second tape, folks. I think you'll find it interesting.
It may get better. However, like I said before, and I'll say it again, there's going to come a one particular event, whatever that might be, that nothing is going to get better. It's going to get severely worse right to the end.
But you know, we told people to watch when certain things would start occurring, and they just won't believe the two of us because we're only on this one channel, 1 hour once a week. Nobody's ever heard of us before, and the media will not listen and pick up on what we're saying, so nobody cares. It doesn't get out to anybody in the magnitude yet for them to listen. But we've said, when we went on the air, certain things were going to start occurring. And we also said right before the beginning of the New Year's,
right,
not January New Year's, but the scriptural calendar New Year's, these things would start happening and building up. October the 1st begins, or not October the 1st, I think it's September the 18th, I have to go back and look at it, begins the new year, scripturally.
Yes.
And what's going on with the floods and stuff in this country and the heat wave on the East Coast and the water going into the aquifers in California
bad now, what's it going to be
and all of
September?
this stuff going on everywhere that's worse than it was when we first said it. They have to admit it's worse than when we first said this was going to occur. But isn't it interesting that the time frame it's occurring in? And as we get closer to September 18th, in the next few weeks, people ought to sit up and watch. Do they know what they're talking about? Are things going to get worse or what? But they won't do that. They'll just say, oh, well, it's just somebody throwing...
Well, you know, it's just like when you're in your living room and you switch on the TV and you're sitting there and you're watching all this stuff happen and you're watching it happen. I think people have been programmed to a certain degree mentally that when they see something really bad happening, they just sit back and watch. They don't take note of it because they're used to watching these kind of things on TV.
Another thing, very simple.
Mentally.
Very simple things. months and months and months ago, before anybody even talked about it. Nobody was talking about it in the Middle East by the participants there, or even here, in the same way, at least, that we were. We said, Israel is going to give up the Gaza Strip.
Yes, yes.
No, no. And actually, she's going to give that up, but she's going to gain land by moving further into Jordan and further up into Lebanon, in actual fact. But the Gaza Strip is going to be given over in some form or manner to the Palestinians. There's no way around it. It's just prophesied, and it is happening, and we were saying this months before they would even publicly talk about it.
Exactly.
And what are the Israelis saying now? We're willing to talk about it.
See?
And it will happen.
But how many people will really sit up and take
We have a friend
notice?
that we like to poke fun at one another a little bit in a friendly sort of way, but I'm going to be interested to see Shrimp whistle.
Oh. Okay.
But I say that in fun and humor,
Oh, of course,
not in any
yes.
seriousness of in
We
the
love
wrong
him.
way.
We love him.
But the thing is, this is going to occur. There are some
Absolutely.
other things that we've talked about is going to occur. Iran, modern-day ancient Persia, and this is something I wanted to get into about some of the prophecy things later on in the show. Iran, through some kind of, I don't know how it's, interplay back and forth with Israel or through intermediaries or something, they are going to help fund the rebuilding of the temple. And that sounds as far off the wall as you can get prophetically to some people,
Sometimes
I think.
it's that way, yeah.
And ancient Babylon is going to be doing some very drastic. Now what we want to do with this tape, because we're going to run out of time, is we need to run past that one section to where it comes back to us on the videotape so that we can go into the thing I really want to get to tonight. But it's interesting when I mentioned there about Israel going up into Lebanon and over into Jordan.
Right.
It's interesting, since we said that, of course we knew it all along and we've said on other places, but since we've said that, there is now a treaty with Jordan and Israel. And that treaty is going to open up a nonviolent means for Israel to spread over into Jordan, but in a way that will not be offensive, but it will fulfill biblical prophecy. Now, I hope that the tape is moved up yet.
Moving it up.
Okay. Just to that one section where we were talking in the same outfit, but as soon as it comes out of there. Yeah, because there was an insert within the insert. I hope it's not confusing. But you see, these are things that are starting to add up now, Arlene, and this is program number 215, and these are only 2 or 3 things that we've pulled out of these 200 and some hours of tapes. And boy, soon we're going to pull out a whole bunch more because it's going to slam us right in the face, and people don't think we know what we're talking about.
Well, I don't really think it's us that,
No, that's the point.
you
It
know,
isn't
it's
us.
not us.
Everybody looks at us because they
It's
know us
not
and they
us.
only see us. They don't see the message or where that message comes
Exactly,
from.
exactly.
But one of these days it's going to
It's time to wake up,
shake 'em.
folks.
So how are we doing, Scott? We close to it? Don't go through the whole tape.
I think we're okay.
Okay, we'll start it then, because it should be my comments about that section. The reason I wanted to show that one was because it referred back to the last insert that we're going to do. And this last one was done. This is why I wanted people to remember this month, September of 1993. Here we are in September of 1993 on September the 4th. And a full 2 years are not up. Now, in this section they're going to see, it's going to run something like 10 to 15 minutes. And it's got a little more in there than me talking about specifically just the Gaza Strip.
Right.
But the reason I want to show it is because it builds a foundation for our viewers of where we get some of this information and why we understand this book and why we can tell it literally like it is and what's going to happen and what is happening in advance so that they can read it on the front pages of the New York Times.
Well, all they have to do is open the Bible and read it in the Bible.
I know, but they
prefaces
won't do that for
the
some
headlines.
strange reason.
Yes.
But see, maybe, who knows, we're part and parcel of hopefully inspiring a return to studying this book to see what it really does say, because most of the world has been swamped with false teaching about what this book really says.
Yes.
And when you read it and look at it from the point of view of the original writers and what the original words mean based on their use within the Bible, not what some scholar says, but the way they are used in each place they're used in the Scriptures, you can find out what they mean, and lo and behold, you can tell what the news is going to be 2 years ahead of time.
Shall we roll it?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I wanted to preface it by saying that within there, because if they don't listen closely, they might miss it. But in there, I said about all of these events I'm talking about within 2 to 3 years. And here we are, under 2 years. Now, when you're dealing with prophecy that was written in some cases like 600 years prior to the birth of the Messiah, that's a long time to go back.
Oh, yes.
And then say what it means and when it's going to occur within a 2-year to a 3-year time frame, I think that's pretty accurate.
I think people ought to sit up and take notice.
Yes.
Really.
And I think it's extremely
It's
accurate to give them the time of the year to watch these events build up to. It's like we're coming up toward the new year now. September, the evening of September the 17th probably will be the beginning of it. Because I say probably because you have to see the new moon up there, and when you see it at the right place on the planet, you know that that new year is now started. But anyway, we're just, what, 2 weeks away or less from that time frame?
Very short time, yeah.
So within the next couple of weeks, on through the next couple of weeks after or so, interesting things should still be occurring, because we're right in the end time frame when things like this are going to hit the world, and they are, and ever since we went on this show, they've been worse than ever. But nobody pays any attention.
I just get a feeling that maybe this might be the line of demarcation, Bob. I really do. I just get a feeling, gut feeling.
Yeah. Well,
might be
I
that
can say one thing. The
beginning
shows
of the
we're going to
end.
do in the future are going to be much more specific and stronger, because they won't be able to deny it when they... Well, I thought we would cut off there, Arlene, because you said your most famous line.
Right.
The line of demarcation.
Yes.
I think we've crossed that, because right after you said that, I said we're going to be more specific later on.
Yeah.
And we were, and we called September the 11th, 2001.
Much
Nobody
more
else did.
specific,
We
right.
called the war in Afghanistan. We called the war in Iraq. And some other things that are still on the drawing board. We also, well, I was going to say about Arafat, but let me go back to this program. I was mentioning there on the program that was September the 4th, 1993. And as we were discussing, 2 years and more before that, I had said in 2 or 3 years, Israel will give the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians. Now, this has been an off and on thing because of the way the Intifada worked and everything, so Israel's had to go back and forth into Gaza. But technically, Gaza was signed over on September the 13th of 2001, just a few days after that program.
Wow.
And everybody saw that on the White House lawn with President Clinton and Arafat and the Israeli leader there, I forget, Perez, I guess. I don't remember his name now for some reason. Must be senility setting in on your part. I mean on my part. So anyway, we have been even more specific than that in calling it even to the day on September the 11th. Now when I say we called it to the day on September 11th, let me be clear about something. I absolutely was certain in July 31st, I guess it was, by then, and then on the programs we did on August the 4th or the 8th, whatever, of the month, that something like what happened in New York was going to happen. I was not 100% certain of the day, but through direct or indirect help, we did call it to the day, even calling it the 9/11 month. And then we also called the very day of the beginning of the fighting in Afghanistan, the day ahead of time, and some other interesting things. So we've been very specific, folks, and I'm working on some other things right now that if I can pull together a couple more things to doubly make sure that I'm saying the right things, and I think we'll have some more for you that'll probably shake a few people up.
Oh, yeah.
But I really like to try to be as sure as I possibly can before I say the final thing. Now, I mentioned on there, on that program, that the end of the ideal chronology of prophecy in the Bible was ending somewhere between 1997 up through the very beginning of 1998. Well, in actual fact, in September of 1998 is when that ended. We are no longer in the 6,000 years of man. We're in like a transition period of like 33 and a half years between the end of the 6,000 years for man's rule and the beginning of the millennium, or the 1,000-year rule of the Messiah. And this particular 33 and a half year time is what the Messiah was talking about when he said, this generation will not pass until all these things are fulfilled. And you'll have to admit, whether I call another thing in the future accurately or not, I have called about a dozen things accurately in the past from this point back, from about 1989 until now. And it amazes me that we've been able to understand that, but it has nothing to do with being a prophet or anything like that. It has to do with finally discovering some of the scientific keys presented in the Bible itself to tell those, or show anyone who finds these keys, how to put the chronology together. And I can tell you one thing, it doesn't start in understanding year to year to year, it understands benchmarks. And when you find the benchmarks as they occur, that gives you more and more accuracy so that you can pinpoint within 7 years, within 5 years, 2 years, and months, and even down to, in some cases, we will be able to say even to the day. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because I was going to make a few comments about Jeremiah, but I may or may not have time, and we'll just save that if I don't get to it, to the Code 6.4 program. I started off that series of inserts with the interview with the rabbi asking about the temple. I asked several other things about that, about things than was shown on there. But the temple is going to be rebuilt. Now, the temple is not, folks, listen up, my friends in the Arab world, listen up, my friends in the Jewish and Israeli world, listen up, folks in America and Europe and wherever you are. This temple that is going to be built, and let me say this very clearly, this temple that is going to be built, and listen up very closely, our friends in Israel that are trying to force the building of the temple and turning, if they're not careful, turning Israel into a civil war, which, by the way, is prophesied in the Bible. That temple will not be on the old temple site. Now let me say that again. It will not be on the old temple site that everybody's fighting over. And the Wailing Wall is not the Wailing Wall of the temple, by the way, and I think a lot of them know it, but it's hard to change tradition. But the scriptures are very clear about where that temple is going to be built. And I can tell you where it's going to be built simply by reading the scripture. And if you have any moxie at all, you don't have to say, oh, that doesn't mean that. All you have to do is just listen to and or read the words, and what the words say is what they mean. I mean, is what they mean. Now listen, folks, this is so simple it's pathetic, and there are more than one scripture to show where the temple is going to be built. But listen to this, chapter 2 of the book of Isaiah, and it is very, very clear. The word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days. Now let me ask you something. When I began this program, didn't I tell you about a little key to understanding the last days? Now, the last days under any category are the last days of man's rule on this earth. And this is not talking about the full time of the last days from the Messiah down to our time. It's talking about the end of the last days, specifically our time. Now listen to what it says. Now, let me give you a clue, my friend. Some of you watching this are amazing to me, because every so often you'll see me or pass me by or whatever, someplace, somewhere, sometime, somehow. Candid cameras on you. But I'm amazed at the different categories of people that watch this program that never respond except when they see us in person. And then it just blows my mind who the people are actually watching this program. Now let me tell you something, and listen very closely. I did not get this from the Christian teaching. And the reason I'm saying this is because the Israelis that are in, at least those Israelis and the Jewish folks that are interested in this kind of thing will say, Bob, that's just your kind of westernized, Christianized teaching. Well, it isn't, because first of all, I'm not a Christian. Secondly, and even more importantly, I found this basic information first from an Israeli rabbi who wrote a booklet on it and explained it quite clearly. So I know that this is nothing new to the Israelis, at least certain sections of them. But let me tell you, your temple, well, it's not even your temple. The temple of Yahweh is not going to be built on the old Temple Mount. No way, no time, no how. Here's where it's going to be. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yahweh's house, now you look it up in different translations, and some of them say Yahweh's temple. That's what Yahweh's house is. It is the temple. Shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Now let me ask you a question. Do you know what the top of the mountains are in that area around Jerusalem? Well, Mount Moriah is not the highest hill there. It's not the top. This says it will be established in the top of not just the or a mountain, but of the mountains. Did you know that basically there are 7 mountains around Jerusalem? What do you think, or which one of those do you think is the highest, or the top one? Well, it's the same one that from the top of it almost is where the Messiah was slaughtered, and from that vantage point you could look down into the temple. And one of the Roman soldiers there at the time could look down on that temple and saw the veil rent. Now you cannot see that from the other side of the temple where everybody says that the Messiah was killed. He was killed up on the Mount of Olives. And from the Mount of Olives you look down on the Temple Mount. So what does that tell you? You know, Josephus shows clearly that the Shekinah left the temple from the Temple Mount right prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and went up and shone brightly on the Mount of Olives. The red heifer was slaughtered up there. The Messiah was slaughtered up there on a tree. So where is this temple going to be built in the next few years? Because that temple will be up and around within 20 to 22 or 3 years. It's going to be on top of the Mount of Olives. And it's going to look down on the mosque. It's going to look down on the city of Jerusalem. It's going to look down on the Temple Mount, and it is going to be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. Verse 3 of Isaiah 2, and many people shall go and say, come you, and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of Yahweh, of the Elohim of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, for out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of Yahweh from Jerusalem. And this is not talking about the millennium here either. This is talking about the end of days, or the last days. See verse 2. Now, let's go over in Zechariah 8 and notice something very interesting. Verse 20, thus says Yahweh of hosts, it shall yet come to pass that there shall come people and the inhabitants of many cities. Verse 21, and the inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us go speedily to pray before Yahweh and to seek Yahweh of hosts. I will go also. Verse 22, yea, many people and strong nations shall come to seek Yahweh of hosts in Jerusalem and to pray before Yahweh. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all languages of the nations, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, we will go with you, for we have heard that Elohim is with you. This is all talking about the time when the temple is up. Now there's something very interesting here in verse 23 too, but that's another topic and I don't want to get into that this evening. But look folks, it's very clear in the scriptures that we're going to see a temple built, and it's not going to be stopped from building because of animal rights complainers that animals are being killed up there and slaughtered in the Temple Mount. Do you know the Arabs make sacrifices of, I guess it's lambs, for their services or special days? Nobody complains about that up on the old Temple Mount, or that they do it in other places in Mecca and other places. Why does nobody complain about that? Well, nobody's going to complain about it when the Israelis have their temple up and animal sacrifices resume again. So we're living in a very interesting time, folks, and I can tell you right now there is going to be a temple. Animal rights advocates are not going to stop it, and there's going to be a priesthood. They're going to be, the ark's going to be brought to, what should I say, reappearance, if that's the way to present it. And in fact, something most people never talk about, the original old tabernacle in the wilderness will also be found and will be apparently erected too along with the temple. And I hate to say this, but it might be nice to know for you Palestinians, when the ark is discovered again, you folks are going to be the ones that have it, and you're going to give it to Israel. And they're going to put it in the temple that you're going to help them build, along with other Arab nations, along with Lebanon, along with Iran and others that are going to help build and finance that temple. And just like in the days of David, you're going to offer over the Ark of the Covenant to Israel to put in the temple that you're going to help build. Interesting times, folks, and we're in right now 6 years left of this 7-year transition period to set all of this up. So in the 14 years after that, you're going to see prophecy come to pass like you have never seen before. Next week, folks, or 2 weeks from now, and then don't forget on Thursday, every other Thursday, code 6-4. Bye-bye now.